Hey everyone, my name's Gunther and welcome back to Igua Zoo. Conservation Canada has continued to expand its latest zoo with the introduction of a new capybara habitat and its 4 new inhabitants. Thanks to a local outreach program, names were submitted and I'm happy to introduce Rodney, Nugget, Mara, and Lulu. I'm also really excited to introduce our latest new hire to Igua Zoo. Please join me in welcoming Camilla Cortez. Now stay tuned as we discuss just why Camilla has joined Igua Zoo. Now, today marks a change away from the usual full speed builds we're used to, or really as well as our speed builds are as full as they can be. Now, I thought it might be better to focus on more impactful builds at a slower pace. This will actually help anyone who watches just to see how something maybe comes together. But of course, we're still going to have live streams, and I really hope you join in. Rumor has it that a future live stream is planned that might just be a 6-hour franchise build. So join in and see what someone can build in 6 hours. Now getting to our build on screen, when it comes to a capybara habitat and our core theme of Igua Zoo, which is really just building something that's going to be surrounded by a really cool looking older temple, I really wanted to have some key focus points for the exhibit. And for me, that means having 2 key builds. The first one is going to be this really awesome looking archway that's going to have some throwback to these gold plates that you might normally find in this really cool jungle temple that's hidden away from society. And that was really the theme behind this. Of course, adding in some bamboo on the one side acts as kind of a brace for falling pieces. And on the left-hand side, we can actually see one of these pieces that's fallen off into the rubble. It's these really cool small details that kind of pull everything together. Now, I did mention there's going to be 2 builds for this one. So the first one was our archway, and the second one is going to be this rather plain looking temple entrance to their shelter. And the idea really behind this is it's a square box. Now, funny enough, I in no way planned this. This is exactly 8 meters wide, so it fits really well with a building that we're going to add on the back. It's going to add a little bit of that modern look, but still keeping with that South American theme. Now, of course, that's all easier said than done. On paper, you may have this really cool idea, but bringing it to life is entirely different. For me, on this particular build, originally I just wanted a really smooth edge door, but it just didn't look very good. So in response, I created this really interesting looking archway. Adds a little bit of extra flavor to the build, but also keeps it kind of falling within that theme that it is a temple. So it works out, and I think for all of you console players out there, it's a key takeaway, for me anyway, which is that pieces have double use. And what I mean by double use is that your block of stone may have originally been built to maybe be a support beam, which is exactly what these are. But instead, we're going to make our own wall out of it. Now, part of the reason why we're making our own wall, funny enough, is because I'm not a huge fan of the temple 4x4 grid pieces. I personally find it looks really bland, and it doesn't really fit with a lot of the broken down walls that we see in the game. So knowing that, maybe it's time for us to start building all of our own walls. Now, admittedly, it's going to be a lot of work and it's going to be pretty piece heavy, but I think that's a small price to pay for something that's going to look truly amazing. And I'm really excited about what this is going to mean for Igua Zoo. In fact, I've already started planning some of my future builds, and I can't wait to show you how this zoo is going to turn around. I think this is going to be one of my favorite zoos, and maybe my best one yet. Which I think goes to show for all of you console players who just joined the party that is Planet Zoo, builds are not always going to look perfect the first time, but the more you play, the better it becomes. This is also a perfect example of using pieces in a different way. I am a big fan of creating custom barriers. The downside with that though is, what do you make your barriers out of? Sometimes the pieces that you have just don't really work that well. For me, it took me a while to land on this particular barrier build. And really all it is just a bunch of African sticks placed next to each other, pivoted around, tilted one way or the other to make sure they're all flat and straight, and then just copied across the entire board. And it makes a really cool looking barrier that's natural, that fits in with the entire build, and kind of makes it look really interesting. And for me, that's what I really want to come about. I want to try something that's interesting, that's going to push my skills just a tad little further. Of course, in hindsight, maybe keeping it all a little mishmash, like you see here, might have been better, but I'm still happy with our final product. Now, I'm not going to take credit for everything when it comes to this build though. Huge shout out to the community and the Discord for providing a lot of advice and tips and tricks on what I could do in playing around with things. I really wouldn't have been able to build this without your help. Now, if you're new to Planet Zoo and if you want to get some more hands-on tips and tricks, things like that, feel free to head over to our Discord. It's a growing community. We have quite a few people there, and they're always more than happy to show you some really cool builds. Now, speaking of builds that we've used in the past, this is something that we used in our first episode. I actually created this to kind of mask that really ugly looking wall on the left-hand side. And maybe it was time for us to start reusing it to create this really cool looking habitat for the capybara. And it really ties everything together. Of course, nothing ties a habitat together though, like foliage. And foliage is just king when it comes to creating really cool looking habitats. And I'm really happy with what happened here. Now, that being said, I did introduce Camilla in our earlier intro. I just want to share a little bit more about Camilla. So Camilla's parents have a strong connection with Conservation Canada and its many different zoos and programs, and I've actually asked the zoo director to have Camilla spend the next year volunteering with Igua Zoo. They hope that this once-in-a-lifetime experience will help her to understand the importance of accountability. It is my hope that over the next few months, Camilla will come to understand the importance of the zoo's conservation and education programs. Camilla will be starting her tenure with us as a junior zookeeper, and I look forward to seeing her grow with the zoo. Now, of course, I do want to give a special shout out to Sparrow838 for the amazing idea that is Camilla Cortez. This entire backstory was her design, and I'm super excited about that, so thank you very much, Sparrow. What does this mean for everybody else? Continue to provide your ideas of employees that you would like to see working at Igua Zoo. And we're going to try to work in as many as we can into the idea that Igua Zoo is a living and breathing location, and we're going to see the story grow. Now, stay tuned in further episodes as we talk more about Camilla's growth and all of the fun characters that she's going to meet at Igua Zoo, and I'm really excited to bring an added level of detail to our new speed build series. Now, with that out of the way, it's time to talk a little bit more about foliage, and I gotta say, one tip when it comes to working with foliage, which really is layering is key. It's always fun to layer in additional levels of detail when it comes to foliage. There's so much out there that just makes everything look really unique, and I think these vine pieces are a prime example of that. It's one thing to add in some bushes and some trees, but when you go to a higher elevation, this is really where your natural eye is gonna land. So adding in some additional details makes it look really interesting, and on top of that, adds more to the realism that is our habitat. Now, of course, looking at the barrier in hindsight looked a little bland, so with some advice from our community, it was time for us to create some little different breaks within the actual zoo barrier. And really, all this meant was using some of these really interesting looking broken temple walls, adding them in to break up all of this long wood walls. And with a few small details, we were able to create an even more unique looking habitat. Now, of course, nothing ever survives when you first put it on paper. And I think that's one thing I want everybody to understand, including myself. I need to realize that what I draw on paper and what I want to bring to life may not actually happen the way we want. Sometimes we're just constrained by the building pieces, or maybe we're constrained by our imagination. So I want you to remember, not everything's going to work out perfectly the first time, and that's totally cool. That is the joy of Planet Zoo. Now, what Planet Zoo speed build is complete without some type of education sign? And I wanted to do something a little bit more unique for our first habitat for Igua Zoo, and this is more of a wraparound education sign. It's the first time I've ever done something like this, and I really like the way it worked out. And interestingly enough, it really only took 4 pieces to bring this all together. Of course, shout out to the South American fence piece. Flipping it upside down adds a whole other level of detail that you really just can't build yourself. So remember, sometimes pieces can be used in different ways that were not the original intended use to create something even more unique. Of course, another shout out to Lion Sign Pack as well. I don't think I would ever be able to make something as detailed as these signs that you're going to see that bring this education board together, and I'm truly in your debt for creating something like this. Now, we are approaching the end of our speed build portion of this video, and I do want to say this is a different style for me. It was different putting this all together, and I hope you liked it. I would love your feedback on how this build came together. If you like this style of slower speed build with more intended focus, so let me know in the comments below. I would really appreciate it, because this is going to help to change and shape our channel moving forward. Otherwise, hang tight as we dive into a live tour of our new completed Capybara Habitat. Of course, no speed build is complete without a live tour, and I figured it's about time for us to dive into our new tour of our latest habitat for the capybara. And speaking of new, we actually have some capybara pups that we have to name. So these are totally unexpected, which means I wasn't planning on having names or baby capybaras. So that being said, we need 2 names. So please leave some names in the comments below of what you would love to name these capybara pups, and we will make it so. Of course, there's quite a bit for us to tour, but before we get to the habitat itself, I want to acknowledge these empty spaces. These are not going to be empty for much longer. We're planning on filling them in, and I actually have some really cool ideas on how we can kind of fill these in and make it look a little bit more realistic, and I'm really excited about it. So stay tuned for a future build of what you can expect. Now, we're going to start off with our education sign, really just because I'm in love with how this looks. I've never thought of building a wraparound education sign. This is the first time I've ever done something like this, and it worked out really well, and I can't believe I've never thought of doing it. So thank you to Lion for his sign pack, and thank you to everybody else for all of the ideas and the support in creating something like this that helped me to feel comfortable in creating a wraparound habitat sign. So thank you very much. Now, of course, we're not here to talk about education. We're here to talk about everything else. And a few things, we have our back wall. I went through and added in some trees, and this is the best tree that I can find that actually fits. I was trying a few other trees, but they actually they come in and out. They if you zoom in, you can kind of see some of them kind of move around. And it's not the wind, it's because they keep on phasing out due to the line of sight. So I ended up replacing with these trees, and I think it looks pretty cool. I actually think it adds more to the whole idea that this is in the midst of like a valley on the mountain, things like that. So a lot of work left to do to fill in everything, but I think it's coming together. Now, we're not here just to talk about foliage. Oh, look at that capybara just taking a swim. I love how they look, and man, capybaras are like the best. I would love to have one as a pet. Not a good idea. You never want to have capybara as a pet. But speaking of pets, one of our capybara was originally a pet that's been turned over to Igua Zoo to continue some education and to give it a life and as natural an environment as possible. Usually when you have animals that are pets, you can't really release them back into the wild. They're not equipped for that. So placing them in zoos or in sanctuaries are usually the next best option available to them. So we have 1 pet and 3 rescues. And then of course we have our 2 baby capybara. And these are really, I'm at a loss for words, actually. I've recorded this tour a few times, and I'm still at a loss for words sometimes. But these baby capybara, these would be released back into the wild once they hit a certain age because they're living in as natural an environment as possible. Now, I realize that capybara are rodents. They typically are found everywhere, so they have a lot of human interaction, but it's not just about capybara, it's about any animal. If you have them as a pet, you can't release them into the wilderness. So something to keep in mind. Now, talking about the habitat itself, I'm going to share my inspiration actually came from Shadow the Tomb Raider, which is a fantastic game. If you haven't played it, I totally encourage you to play it. And I took a lot of inspiration for these builds from that game. Now, did that mean that I had to download Shadow the Tomb Raider, replay it to get to that point? It sure did. Totally worth it though, because I think it really helped to shape this entire build. And off camera, I actually went through and added a little bit more detail. You can kind of see some vines curling up the side of these bricks, and I think it adds a little bit of extra added detail, and I love the way it kind of all came together. Now, of course, we saw a lot of the interior of the exterior of the habitat, my apologies, come together. We're not here to look at that. We're here more to focus on the backstage, which I'm really excited to show off. Now, again, shout out to the community for helping me to build this. Nobody's perfect, and I think everybody's learning, even me, even after almost actually over a year playing Planet Zoo, it is still something that I'm learning, and I don't play a whole lot, so I'm really thankful for all of your feedback. Now we have our backstage gate. This is preventing our staff from, or our guests from going back here, and it's a mix of modern and our temple view. And I think this works really well because we did need to kind of create something that was gonna denote where your guests can and can't go. Now, speaking of backstage areas and where you can't go, we have some Hesco barriers. We definitely don't want people playing around with these, so that's why it's kind of hidden back here in the corner. It's where we put a lot of our rubbish, things like that, when it's ready to kind of be taken out, and we would probably, in this case, airlift it out in some form or manner. But not here really to worry about how garbage is taken off the mountain. We're here more to talk about these really cool looking solar panels, which didn't really make it into the speed build, more so because like backstage stuff just really doesn't entice a lot of people. But it's actually made utilizing 3 pieces. So it's the New World decoration piece, some black plastic pieces, and then just some fence ends, and that's how we've created our solar panels. So pretty easy, and adds a little bit of extra added realism to the entire build. Now, what's not realistic is the fact that they're not actually connected correctly. They should not be connected this way. They actually should be connected in parallel, and then you would have one power station on usually actually this side. So I think I got a little lazy when I was building it, and there's no battery bank, but that's a future problem for me to take care of. We also have our transport. So this is our staff transport. This is how they kind of get around, especially when they're maybe transporting some animals from a vet clinic back to their habitat and vice versa. And I think Camilla is going to be in charge of cleaning up all the grime and the dirt from the build. Now, speaking of Camilla, huge shout out again to Sparrow for the amazing backstory and the idea of Camilla. And if you have some people that you think would want to work at Igua Zoo, leave it in the comments below or on the community post. I'm really excited to see where we can take Igua Zoo with this new story of people that have made the zoo a little bit more unique. Now, for the backstage area, really cool. Ignore this window, but all the other windows actually have a matching window on the inside. So this adds some additional light to the backstage area. And admittedly, our backstage area adds a little bit of extra work. We do need to add a better roof on. Thinking more probably just some brick roof, and then we need some additional lighting, but that's okay. Small price to pay for our overall build. Now, again, huge shout out to Sparrow for the idea of adding in a lot of the different decals or decals, depending on how you want to say that word. We have some water around our drains. We have some grime from just natural buildup. And then, of course, our paint. So we've painted this place yellow. It's a little bit more of an inviting color, but that does mean that the paint would flake off eventually. And it's a very humid environment up here, and that would make sense. Paint just doesn't really do very well in humid environments. So we would have to repaint, but the reality is Igua Zoo has bigger things to focus on. Conservation and education is much more important than paint in the backstage area. Our guests don't come back here, so we're not too worried about that. Now we have our water reclamation services, so a big on creating realism. So we've taken our water filtration system, added on some additional pipes, which was really fun to do. And then we have an intake and outtake pipe that leads through the wall. So you have our black and white pipes. We also have our main supply pipe, and then it actually leads into the underground. It would go to the water pool that we have in our habitat. So this is what's keeping that water clean, healthy for our habitat and our capybara. And even though we're building on sandbox mode, I've left a lot of the realism on because I'm a fan of building in franchise mode. The only downside of building in franchise, you can't control the weather and you can't control the light. And money. Money is always an issue sometimes in franchise mode. So I've left a lot of the additional requirements from franchise on, with the exception of those 3 things, just so it looks a little bit better and we can have more fun. I thought I actually opened that door for a second. I was totally amazed. I had powers, I thought. But this is our backstage area, and I gotta say, it probably one of my better backstage areas. It actually looks realistic. It's a little large, and part of the reason why is because of the way that I wanted to build this. I wanted to have like a little step down area, but it was interfering with the pathing system, so kind of had to make do with what we had, and this is the end result. So it's a little wider than I wanted it to be, but it works. Now, really excited to actually show these off as well. These are hampers. So when you work in like a clinic or anything like that, you typically have to wash all your clothing, especially after dealing with one animal. So if you move from one species to another, especially if they have contagious viruses, you would need to clean all of your clothing and stuff like that. So you'd have hampers to wash, and it doesn't make sense for us to ship all of our clothing down the mountain to get clean. So any bedding material, stuff like that, we have our own little hampers, and maybe that means we need to build some type of washing machine somewhere, maybe closer to the staff area. So more food for thought on future of Igua Zoo, but this is it. This is our capybara habitat, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. I hope you're happy. I hope you learned some stuff. And as always, if you're really happy with the content or the video, feel free to subscribe or leave a comment or drop a like. All of that helps me and lets me know I'm doing a good job, and I really appreciate your support. Otherwise, I just want to say stay tuned for more on our habitat, and stay tuned for more on our community in general as we delve more into Community Zoo 2, our Architect Challenge, as well as Igua Zoo. So I'm really excited to bring more of that to you guys. Now, as always, I just want to say thank you very much for all of your support. And of course, ciao for now, everybody.